Hey, so I'm still getting my networks and computers roles figured out, and I've never really had a computer that I would leave off and turn on whenever I'm using it. I think this computer is going to be that, the new Ryzen computer, because I'm pretty much just going to do work on that and then save whatever the file is, or rsync whatever the file is, over to a server box, and that server box is going to be, somewhere else on the network. But there's other considerations, because I want to hardwire everything, and that would be easier if the point of presence was in another room. So I'm kind of bouncing between these different ideas and figuring out where the hardware is going to go, without disturbing things too much, but also leaving lots of options open. I think what I'm going to do is transfer the old box off of the SSD and put it on the old spinning platter hard drive. And then transfer the SSD into the Ryzen box and use that SSD for dual booting and have a Windows install there. The speeds are pretty comparable. I actually might get better NVMe performance out of Windows, although I think that's low enough level. The operating system doesn't really matter. Plus, on Windows, I would actually be playing games, probably. So that's really the only reason you have a copy of Windows. The other thing is setting up a KVM, a kernel virtual machine. I don't know how fiddly those are. That'd be pretty cool. Since the 5600G APU is an APU, it doesn't need a graphics card. So I have this situation where the motherboard is like, that's it, and the APU came with the Wraith Stealth Cooler, which is pretty low profile. It's nothing too ridiculous. So my build is mostly flat, especially with the NVMe drive in there. So I'm definitely going to be figuring out how to 3D print a case. The motherboard is a micro ATX, which means I've got 9.6 inches or 244.35, I think, millimeters. So 244 is out of bed width for my Ender 3, which means I'll be printing it in parts, which is fine, because I think I'm just going to work up a skeleton first, and then work on the case after that in whatever parts I need. But having the motherboard standing up with the CPU on one side and having the PSU on the opposite side of the motherboard gives me about a 6-inch thick build, and at 9.6 inches on the motherboard, I'll probably have 10 by 10 by 6 for a case, which would be pretty neat. Maybe 10 and a half, because I want it to be nice and rigid, solid. No, I can also custom make the I have the intake is cut out for the Wraith cooler, so that it's pressed right up against it. So you're not circulating heat inside a PC box. You're pulling cool air from outside, heating it against the heatsink, and then it's going out of the box. I say out of the box because right now it's literally in a box. It's inside the motherboard. While I was figuring out what parts go which way, I had the motherboard set up, just sitting on top of its own box, and I was just running it like that. It's taking up desk space, being a little annoying with the wires coming out over my input devices. And also, the longer it stays there, the more likely it is to suffer some kind of damage. Liquid spill, kid damage, just any number of things. I kind of have to get this out of the way, but I also kind of want to get measurements, and I also kind of want to set it up somewhere where I can play Legos with it and be like, how is this case going to look? So I powered it down and powered down the my older computer, and then I was like, all right, I have to design some stuff. I have to, adjust those 3D printed paddles, because I've got the keyboard that I'm still putting together, and that needs its own set of paddles, and those paddles are different than the other paddles, so the layout's slightly different. So I got to work on that, and I want to work on this. I decided I was going to make that computer case. Like, hey, how do I get this design going? And then everything's turned off. Okay. Do I need to use a laptop to work on this? I actually have the Raspberry Pi 400. So, update, on like 2 years ago, maybe, I was complaining about the Raspberry Pi 64-bit OS, and it's just as I expected. Around now, well, they made the release for the 64-bit OS official a little bit ago, like 6 months ago or something. So I installed that on my Raspberry Pi. I'm sorry, actually, I installed Manjaro, 64-bit Manjaro on my Raspberry Pi 400, and I ran that with. I installed all the software that I use, and that would be impressive, actually. I installed all the software that I use, and I did a little bit of work on it. Yeah, the keyboard's made of mush, but it's still really cool. And the potential is there for, well, just taking that keyboard out, or taking the controller out and putting it in another keyboard. But the real point is, it was usable. It wasn't slick, and it wasn't super fast. I don't want to say I wasn't impressed by it. I was impressed by it. So, right at the 2-year mark, it's about what I was talking about. That's it. Which is fine, I guess. You buy with the future in mind. You buy with the expectation that you're going to run into issues, that things are going to take some time to work out, and then you wait. Patience is a virtue. Patience will also make your life a lot easier. So you're not upset all the time. Because things take time. Let's see, what else? Right, so the motherboard was sitting on top of its box. Now it is standing up inside its box with holes cut out for it. I said it was sucking cool air in. It's exposed to the outside. I just cut a hole in the box right where the Wraith cooler goes. There is actually some technical concern about a motherboard with a large air cooler suffering some kind of like torsion or torque on it. That's a lot of mass you're hanging off of, not necessarily the CPU, but the motherboard contact point. And if you could have a case that would actually support it's getting really hot, you might as well. If it were contacting another contact point on the case itself, then you could prevent it from sagging or wobbling, or it would be supported at the farthest end of the lever. But if it's bare metal or like heat tube, then drill like a little pilot hole, let a heat tube poke out, or take a ball peen hammer, let the heat tube touch the case. Consider it supported. Actually, what you would probably want to do is tack weld like a support shape on it, so that it would have the heat sink comes out and almost touches the case, and then on the case side you have just like a little rail that just barely or almost touches it, so that if worse comes to worse, it actually does sag or get pushed around, it'll bump into that first. So, because it's an APU build, I can get away with some of that stuff. And the ATX power supply I have is okay in the standing orientation, because it has the fan in the right direction and the output's in the correct direction, and the blowout in the right direction. So everything just kind of fits together nicely, with motherboard in the middle, CPU and blower on one side, and then PSU on the other side. It should be an interesting print. But in the meantime, like I said, it's inside its own box, which is just kind of funny to me, because in order to design the case, I need the computer to use the computer to design the case for the computer. The computer's designing a case for itself, which seems poetic in some way. I talked about a lot of stuff. I'm gonna have to start taking notes, because I listened through some of these and I'm like, man, I'm all over the place. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, I wanted to talk more about that. Hey, I dropped that point. Yeah, more could be done here. A little more organization would not hurt. All right.